I've come here to celebrate and to say farewell to a very British kind of hero. You just might not know this hero yet. But he does.
I'm a 57-year-old man brought to tears by helicopter.
And they do.
Go forward and right 2 yards.
And she certainly does.
Thinking that potentially we could lose the children was the most awful feeling.
If you hear it, the chances are you're in trouble. But if you are, then this is the most wonderful sound you're ever likely to hear. 40 years of remarkable service. 10 wars.
3 times I watched him go down. 3 times he brought men up.
Thousands rescued. The Sea King. Hail to the chief. The moody Cornish coast is an odd place to start a story about an aircraft. But as we're going to find out, this unsung hero from Britain's flying past is full of surprises. It's a military aircraft known as a double-decker bus with wings. Its role in the armed forces is coming to an end. But if ever there was an aircraft that deserved a right royal send-off, it's this one. The Sea King. These are the very last days of a line of helicopters that have saved more British lives than any other aircraft in history. Like much that is the best of British, its origins lay abroad. The original 1950s model was created by the American Sikorsky Company. It was then totally transformed by engineers from Westlands in Yeovil in the early 60s. The first thing they did was to rip out the American engines and replace them with ones from Rolls-Royce. And you can't get more British than that. This will be an incredible adventure. I will be flying in an aircraft fit for a prince.
That's my helicopter flying over at the moment. I should go. I think this is almost time I should go, but never mind.
Maybe even a future king. And I can't wait.
Great that you get to go out and actually save someone's life, or at least make a difference to someone when you know that they're in trouble.
We're going straight to the heart of the aircraft's wartime world to meet up with the Sea King's military family. And we'll go back through 40 years of civilian service to revisit some of the most perilous Sea King rescues here at home. There's nothing frivolous about the Sea King, and that's because it was designed for a specific task, to be the strongman of the sky, to have power, dependability, and above all, endurance. Like all great aircraft, it's so impressive because it's thoroughly fit for purpose. The Ministry of Defense needed a way to counter the Soviet nuclear submarine threat. The answer? A Cold War hunter-killer helicopter that could operate on its own hundreds of miles from its base or ship. But they also saw the Sea King as a troop carrier, a weapons transporter, a sonar and radar platform, and crucially, a search and rescue aircraft. Over the next 40 years, it would fulfill all of these expectations and more. Now, at the end of its life, it's time to look back and celebrate its greatest moments. This is the Royal Navy Air Station at Culross in Cornwall, home to the 771 Search and Rescue Squadron. Today, we'll be flying with Lieutenant Commander Andy Watts and his crew. How many have you got here?
We've got 8 here. We always have one on search and rescue.
Yeah. Like all of the Ace of Clubs squadron, Andy has also performed in some of the world's most dangerous war zones. Now he has a new challenge. I'm too fat.
No.
Do we look silly though? That's the trouble.
No.
No?
Right, John, we're all ready to go?
It's all fairly relaxed inside, but as soon as you step outside, you feel the intensity and power of the aircraft and the crew. And the sound, well, it's almost overwhelming. Not exactly business class, is it?
A takeoff, but it's like going up in a rocket. There's a tremendous power of the engine, and we're so high already. And dressed like this, I feel like an astronaut. Next stop, the moon. So unlike going off in an aircraft. You're an ordinary aircraft. You're sitting in, off you go. Before you know where you are, you're at 10,000 feet. But we're not. We're still close to the ground. And you feel part of the aircraft. All this strapping and all this equipment makes you feel, well, I'm in a helicopter, I am a helicopter. I'm just going up like a bird. It's an extraordinary feeling.
What a glorious sight! The southwest coast of Cornwall, whizzing past at nearly 130 miles an hour.
It looks marvellous from the air, doesn't it? It gives it something very special, doesn't it? A helicopter journey.
Oh, indeed. I mean, some people say, what a wonderful office window I have, and it's great to be able to look out and see it changing. But it's more importantly that we have to be aware of the coastal path, because this is quite often where we're called upon to pick up people who enjoy the countryside here, enjoy the views, but can get into difficulties.
This is where the peacetime role of the Sea King is often anything but peaceful. When conditions here turn nasty, lashed by rain, with raging winds and high seas, the aircraft won its spurs and the right to be celebrated.
Right below us are the western approaches and some of the most dangerous sailing conditions in Britain. In August 1979, 303 sailing yachts passed this point on their way to the Fastnet Rock on the southwest coast of Ireland, the furthest point of one of the most dramatic and demanding races in the world.
But it turned into a disaster. Monstrous swells were whipped up by near hurricane force winds. One competitor described the waves as being as high as the cliffs of Dover.
Fastnet, southwesterly at severe gale force 9, increasing storm force 10 inland.
We would be thrust like from a cannon into the cockpit at the end of our tethers. Your mouth is full of water, your nose is full of water, your ears are, even though you're hooded. You're soaking wet. We were overwhelmed, totally overwhelmed.
19 yachts were abandoned, 5 were sunk, 15 sailors lost their lives. But many more were saved by these helicopters. It was one of the greatest search and rescue operations ever carried out in these islands.
24-year-old Nick Ward from Hampshire was one of a 6-man crew aboard the yacht Grimalkin. At 30 foot, she was one of the smaller yachts in the race. So when the storm hit, the impact was brutal.
I didn't think that there was any chance of getting out of the situation. Any chance. There was a massive wave behind us, and that's the last thing I saw before the boat turned upright.
It is impossible to know how long Nick remained unconscious, but during that time, chaos gripped the Grimalkin. The captain of the boat was swept away. His 17-year-old son, also part of the crew, watched helplessly as his father was consumed by another massive wave. Under these conditions, the young man and 2 other crewmates abandoned ship and launched Grimalkin's lifeboat, leaving Nick and his crewmate, Jerry Winks, buried under splintered mast poles, presumed dead. It was a desperate moment.
I found myself floating alongside the boat with my head banging against the side of the boat with no one around me. I saw a mop of red hair and oilskins, and so that was Jerry. I managed to grab his safety harness and manhandle him aboard. I thought he was dead, but I needed someone to help me, and so I started thumping his chest. He managed to say some words to me before he passed away in my arms. And I remember those words. Nick, if ever you see Margaret again, tell her I love her.
For the first time since setting out from Cowes 48 hours earlier, Nick Ward was alone. But even in death, his friend Jerry proved to be an inspiration.
Jerry had died, so therefore I felt the only way I could survive was to use him as a sort of sounding board. Calling him names, almost going madly, bizarrely mad. It was all sorts of things going on in my head. Just trying to survive.
Dangerously dehydrated and suffering from hypothermia, Nick clung on to life for 14 hours. But as the sun set on the second day of the storm, he knew he wouldn't survive another night on Grimalkin. But Nick hadn't banked on a brand new, long-range Royal Navy helicopter.
I was just slumped in the corner of the boat, imagining myself dead. Not a nice place to be. I was hearing helicopters, a beating, a beating, a beating, and that beating got louder and louder and louder as I leant on the rail. And there it was, hovering above me.
The mighty Sea King Mark II had arrived. The helicopter crew had been trying to position their aircraft over Grimalkin for some time. But with its mast ripped off and the swell still heaving, landing their winchman safely wasn't going to be easy.
It was quite clear looking down that there were 2 people visible on the yacht, one of whom appeared to be either very seriously ill or had perhaps died.
Finally, Midshipman Harry Harrison descended into the storm. It was his first ever search and rescue mission. He was just 20 years old.
As I was lowered onto the yacht, immediately I was actually dragged right to the forecastle of the yacht, and it was only the bowsprit that stopped me going over the side.
Harry quickly realized that his winch wire was in danger of snagging. He was faced with a terrible choice. If he disconnected, he no longer had a lifeline to his Sea King. But if he didn't, the entire operation would have to be abandoned. For a few terrifying moments, he would work without the lifeline.
The mast had gone, all of the rigging had gone over the side, and looking into the cockpit, it was quite clear that it was full of water. The yacht was only just afloat, and so it was quite important that we actually got off the yacht quickly.
Those thoughts I had in the boat, that I'd never have a family or children, a Sea King rescued me. Excuse me. That's how much it means to me. I'm a 57-year-old man brought to tears by a helicopter. How bizarre is that?
Harry Harrison's twin-engine Sea King could fly twice as far and stay in the air twice as long as previous search and rescue helicopters. For Nick Ward, that made the difference between life and death. At the time, it looked as if the Sea Kings would increasingly concentrate on their civilian search and rescue role. But as it happens, the Sea Kings were about to embark on their toughest military mission in the whole of their career. On the 5th of April 1982, Margaret Thatcher's government sent 27,000 British servicemen and women to reclaim the Falkland Islands following the Argentine invasion. 1 month later, Atlantic Conveyor, a merchant ship loaded with precious British aircraft, arrived in the Falklands. She had just managed to offload her cargo of Harrier jets when 2 Exocet missiles blasted through the ship. 12 men died. 3 Chinook, 6 Wessex and a Lynx helicopter were lost. The untested Mark IV Sea Kings, known as Junglies, were now the most important helicopters in the fleet. Warrant Officer Air Crewman John Sheldon and Commodore Simon Thornwell flew together during the conflict.
The Wessex 5 was an incredibly capable aircraft, but the Sea King could do about 3 times as much.
The Sea King was a resounding success. But John and Simon narrowly avoided disaster when their aircraft, ZA-298, had its main rotor blade shot to pieces by an enemy Skyhawk.
I happened to look out the bubble window at the back of the Sea King, saw the 4 aircraft coming towards us.
When the chap was about to open fire, you would brake, turn very sharply, and you'd descend or climb. Well, that's exactly what we did.
If we hadn't have broken left, we'd be dead. The fighters would have shot us down.
The last aircraft fired his entire 20 seconds worth of 20mm ammunition at us.
We landed on, and that's when we found that we'd had a 20mm cannon shell through the main spar of one of the blades.
Got a blade flown out to us in another aircraft, and we were back in the hunt 2 hours later.
It was the first of many battle scars that particular aircraft would earn on its way to entering Navy folklore as the King of the Junglies.
I get very possessive when people talk about ZA-298 because I consider it to be my aircraft. It certainly saved my life, and I relied on it so heavily during a very difficult time.
Oil salute! One man who understands the value of the Sea King during the Falklands is Welsh Guardsman Simon Weston.
Nice to meet you.
John, how are you doing?
Thanks very much for coming.
He was just 21 when he suffered terrible burns to 40% of his face and body after his ship, Sir Galahad, was bombed.
The helicopters, which had been moving equipment forward, now flocked to help rescue survivors.
Simon knows the Sea King that flew him to safety was based here at Culrose in Cornwall. But he's come here today to meet the man who risked his life when he flew his Sea King into the flames of Sir Galahad to rescue Simon and his fellow Welsh Guards. They've not met since that horrific day.
Hi, John. Right, very nice to meet you, John.
Simon.
Hello.
Pleasure to meet you.
How are you?
Very well, yourself?
Yeah, very good. Very
First
good.
time in Culrose, I hear.
It is, yeah. You know, it's special for me. You know, this is where you all came from. So.
That's true.
And this is, you two have come across each other before, haven't you?
We have indeed.
Lieutenant Boughton's Sea King was one of several helicopters on the scene. The horror of what was happening underneath them could have caused the aircrew to panic. Instead, their quick thinking saved hundreds of lives.
And some colleagues used the downdraft of the aircraft to try and blow those life rafts away from the fire that was on the ship.
The giant Sea Kings, using their rotor blades to blow the packed life rafts away from Simon's burning ship, became one of the striking images of the war. But crucially for Simon, John Boughton decided his helicopter should head directly to the hull of the ship.
I felt, and several of my other colleagues, there were 2 or 3 of the aeroplanes there, but I think I was the first on the scene, that the people that were on the front of the ship, and obviously you were there, had more need of us to get you off immediately, because clearly if someone had climbed into a life raft, they were at least able to get clear of the fire. Do you want to have a look around the aeroplane? I'd be interested to see what you can remember.
All I can remember, I remember being winched through the door on the other side.
Yeah, well, let's go around there.
They ignored the flames, they ignored the explosions, and they ignored the ammunition erupting around them. And they flew their machines into the smoke to lift the queues of men waiting calmly below.
So we're sitting there, we're facing forwards of the ship where you were, and you would have been back here on the front of the ship. What you're really looking at is down the length of the ship into the hold, which is on fire, and there were occasional blasts which would blow us sideways away from where we were trying to pick people up. And then again, the crewman would have to just calmly give you instructions to come back to the position so you could pick the person off the deck.
3 times I watched him go down, 3 times he brought men up to the blackness that covered his helicopter above him.
Don't forget, there was no radio communication at the time. There was nobody on the ships talking to us. The airplanes were talking to each other. So in the very early parts of the rescue, it was very much make it up as you went along.
I'm looking at this now, and I can remember coming up and the winchman turning me to bring me in. I had so many open wounds that everything was just leaching out of me. The skin had been burned away, and because everything was moist, the cold and the discomfort was something unreal. It was something nobody could prepare you for. Getting on this thing was just, it was an epic thing for me. I'll never forget that day and looking up at the underneath of one of these things and thinking, oh, thank God for that.
Afterwards, when we heard the good news stories of your recovery, we were obviously delighted, and I think the whole squadron just had a shared sort of pleasure in the fact that at least we'd contributed to that recovery.
Yeah, it's just simply nice to be able to say thanks, you know. Not too many people get a chance to say thank you to the people who did so much or were a part of saving you and your friends and your colleagues and your comrades. It's just nice to be able to say thanks, you know. So, thank you.
The destruction of Sir Galahad and other ships sent shockwaves through the task force. The Duke of York on HMS Invincible was one of the Sea King pilots who used their helicopters as decoys for incoming missiles.
Militarily speaking, I've been shocked and yet proud. I've been shocked at what has happened, the way that the ships were taken out. I mean, to think that a small missile, perhaps 18 feet long, can do that much damage.
The Sea King was now firmly established in the British public's imagination. Throughout the 1980s, the giant aircraft, piloted by the same crews who had served in the Falklands, used their skills here at home. No job too small, no name too big to be rescued. 130 miles northeast of the Royal Naval Air Station at Culross is RNAS Yeovilton in Somerset, home to the Fighting Sea Kings. If the Navy's grey and red search and rescue helicopter is a Dove, then the green jungly is very much the Hawk.
Predominantly, the Sea King is a great symbol of Britishness and was made only over there at Western Helicopters. So this is very much her home. Wherever we go on operations, for example, in Afghanistan, flying out to remote operating bases with British soldiers, supplying them with their equipment, their ammunition, food, etc. We've got this tremendous symbol of Britishness, which virtually has an invisible label on it saying "Made in Britain." There's a tremendous emotional attachment for all of us who've had the privilege to serve in this community over the past few years. Absolutely.
For this plane.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's going to be sad when...
There are 2 frontline Sea King squadrons based here, 845 and 846. Each has 10 aircraft. This is the formidable Mark IV Jungley. Its rotor blades are folded back to make it easier to transport, and sand filters improve performance in the deserts of the Middle East. But remarkably, some of these airframes were actually used during the Falklands War. I've come here to fulfill a lifelong ambition. I'm going to visit one of the Sea King's ocean-based homes, HMS Illustrious. It was meant to be a bit of fun, but they don't seem to think so.
Okay, ditching immediate actions for the pilot will be to warn the crew, harnesses lock and tight, initiate the distress procedure, which will be a mayday call on the frequency that we're on, and then jettison windows as required.
HMS Illustrious, or Lusty to her friends, has just received orders to set sail for the Mediterranean. Suddenly, this all feels a little bit too authentic.
Any questions on the actual formation brief? Okay, that's brief complete.
This will give you approximately 2 minutes of oxygen in the event that the aircraft ditches and ends up underwater.
Right.
And last thing, name badge on the back of the helmet.
We're ready for action.
We're ready for action.
Now, I admit I've not done this before and I'm a bit apprehensive. We've got to take off now and we've got to fly to a secret rendezvous with one of the most powerful ships in the Royal Navy, HMS Illustrious.
I share a bit of my past with these helicopters. Back when the Sea King was little more than a new boy, I went to school right underneath us, just down the road from Yeovilton. Now it's a tough old bird. The helicopter, I mean. We fly miles out to sea, and there she is, Lusty. This remarkable 20,000-ton helicopter and commando carrier has a top speed of 30 knots. This steel-hulled ship entered service in 1982 and has seen action in all 10 of our recent wars. And there's been a Sea King on board this carrier since day one. I wonder how the 1,000 men and women who live on Lusty will feel when the very last Sea King is cleared for takeoff in 2016. Whatever they're feeling inside, it'll be the job of the Commander Air to make sure it leaves in the correct fashion.
Will people be sad? Will you be sad to see this go?
Yeah, I think so. They've had a pretty good innings, though, I've got to say. There's not many photographs of Illustrious without a Sea King on deck over the last 30 years.
But this ship used to be able to land aircraft, didn't they? And you'd have Harrier jump jets, but now you're almost entirely reliant on helicopters. That's what you do.
Yeah, purely helicopters.
Yeah. Now, if the weather conditions are terrible, what do you do?
Well, they're an all-weather aircraft, the same as the air handlers that operate the deck there. They're all-weather air handlers as well. So 24 hours, 365 days a year, whatever the weather may be.
They're sitting out here?
They're sitting out here.
And when you've got a lot of helicopters coming in and going out, that must be very difficult for you because you've got to coordinate it, haven't you?
It is, and that's one of the challenges.
You've got to keep calm and not get ratty, not get cross with people.
There's nothing wrong with being ratty across from people on occasion.
That's all right.
Sometimes it helps. Really, as Commander Air, that's my job, to get ratty across with people.
So you're allowed to be cross?
I'm allowed to be cross and ratty with people.
Well, you better get ready and prepared. Okay.
The deck is buzzing with helicopters. These might be her last days, but nobody said she would go quietly. A few days from now, these aircraft will be in the Mediterranean. Lusty will provide a wonderful platform for the final flights of the Sea King, but I don't expect there'll be too much time wasted on farewells. But in Yeovil in Somerset, there's a man who might just shed a tear when his beloved helicopter signs off for good. The model planes in this dusty old archive represent every single aircraft made here at Augusta Westland for the last 100 years. Suddenly, I'm 8 years old.
I remember this when I was a kid, the Dragonfly, that was something.
It feels like Britain's flying past in someone's attic.
Who has flown more Sea King helicopters than any other person in the world?
Flown in them, probably me.
It's you.
Yeah, from the variety.
Yeah.
From the variety, yes, certainly. I loved it. I loved the Sea King from the very first time I saw it. It was a gentleman's aeroplane, John. You actually walked up the steps into it.
Yeah.
It was a wife and child aeroplane. And you knew that if you went out in it, you were going to come back to your wife and children because it was that reliable.
How affected were you by the knowledge that this was a hunter-killer helicopter?
Well, not at all, actually, John, because as far as I'm concerned, I've always believed that to maintain the peace, prepare for war, but also the fact that this wonderful weapons system was so readily turned into a system for helping and for saving lives and for rescuing people. I think that was a wonderful thing.
That mattered a lot to you as
Very
one of the
much so.
engineers.
Makes you glow. You know, you think, yeah, I helped with that. I helped you.
That's what's so special about this helicopter. Built to hunt and destroy, made for search and rescue.
It's the 28th of October, 1989. We're 15 miles southeast of Start Point. 75 feet below us, in appalling weather, the 12,000-ton motor vessel, MV Murray, is fighting for her life. Soon after the start of her long voyage home from Tilbury to Karachi in Pakistan, she hit a terrible storm and hurricane-force winds.
A Sea King was scrambled from the naval station at Culross. They'd been informed that there were 14 people on board. But as they approached, it was revealed that there were actually 40 people on the ship, including young children. That's when Navy divers Steve Shiner Wright and Dave Wally Wallace entered the fray. It's a truly extraordinary story.
After my aircraft had filled with as many casualties as they could fit into it, my aircraft then departed, and I opted to remain on the vessel.
Sean had been down there for about an hour, I think, beforehand, and he'd been taking charge. He was always starting to get tired, which was one of the main reasons that I sort of went down.
Dave came down to the deck. I left him down the back end, grabbed one of the ship's officers, and asked him to take me to the radio room. And as we ran onto the bridge, you could see the front end, white water, boiling over the top of all the containers. Containers were snapping off left, right, and centre. Huge waves. Having looked out the front of the vessel, I didn't think we were going to make it. I'd got back to the after area, and Dave had evacuated 6 people by then. That left 4 casualties, plus Dave and I looked at Dave in the eye, and I couldn't tell him, we're not going to survive this.
And I remember just before we were sending the last 2 up, I'd said to Shan, I said, look, I'll tell you what, there's 2 left, you take 1, I'll take the last one.
I knew that if Dave had been left on the vessel with a casualty, his priorities would be looking after a casualty. I knew that if it was just Dave and I left, we'd taken the Queen shilling, it was our job. He wouldn't worry about me and I wouldn't worry about him. Just get on and do your own thing.
When you're there, you're thinking of all sorts of different things, and maybe that's why I said to him, you go up with the second last one, because I was thinking of him, and then he obviously thought about me, and that it would just be him and I.
The last 2 went into the strops. They were winched up towards the aircraft.
I think we'd already signalled to Nige in the aircraft, Nige Tom, to get a shift on, and it wasn't until the winch hook stopped and he just sort of pointed us and signalled for us to jump that we thought, bloody hell, this is it. You know, are we actually going to get away with this?
The vessel upended, and from that to completely underwater in about 35 to 40 seconds. The only option left was to jump. Turned and said goodbye to Dave.
And I do remember saying to Shiner, I'll see you on the other side, mate.
And we launched ourselves from the side of the vessel. I knew it was a reasonably high jump, about 90 feet.
The longest jump ever, yeah, it was a long way down.
The worry was hitting one of the containers on our way down.
When I hit the water, the sea went from sort of green down to dark, to black, really.
I was underwater, clawing to get back to the surface, trying to hold my breath, and there was the involuntary...
The thing that I'll always remember is just looking over my shoulder and I could see the actual ship sort of going down beside me.
And eventually I just couldn't hold my breath anymore. I took an intake, and as I breathed in, my mouth hit the surface of the water, and it was fresh air that went in, not salt water.
I just basically started swimming for my life. Then suddenly the winch hook appeared in front of me, and I can remember sort of looking up, and Nige, the air crewman, was sort of signalling that he was going to take me in, and I remember signalling to him saying, basically, where's Shiner?
I could hear the aircraft in the background, just sitting there, and watch the tail rotor appear over my head. And then 4 dinner plate eyes looking down from the aircraft, wondering, was I alive or was I dead? At which point I smiled. And there was a look of, you so-and-so.
Yeah, I mean, he was sort of lying, big grin in his face, eyes wide open.
Looked across and there was Dave on the end of the winch wire, being swung in towards me.
Helped him hook onto the winch hook, and away we went.
Up to the aircraft we went, hugging each other.
We came close, but hey, we're here, you know, to fight another day.
On their way back in the Sea King, one of the rescued sailors presented Dave with a life jacket. On it, the sailor had quoted the following lines: "To the angels who come in the guise of men, the Lord hath chosen thee to perform the most profound of miracles. Save life. You are what the world was made for." Both men were awarded the George Medal for bravery. In the early 1990s, the Royal Navy's Sea Kings had a new challenge when they were deployed to the Balkans. Once again, ZA-298, now painted in the white and black of the United Nations, found itself at the sharp end of a conflict. This time it was shot in the tail after airlifting hundreds of people from the besieged town of Srebrenica.
Like this, It's very much part of the Sea King's role as a military aircraft. Everything about it feels like wartime activity. But the great thing about the Sea King is its civilian role, completely different. But for the public, that's the role that people know so much better.
This is St Mary's in the Scilly Isles. For the locals, the Sea King has been a vital emergency link to the mainland hospitals for over 40 years. They know that 771 Squadron are ready for every eventuality, but even they can get a shock from time to time. Nikki Hicks was in labour with her second child when things took a turn for the worse.
Unfortunately, baby's heartbeat dipped and found he was in distress. So the decision was made to fly us off then to the mainland by helicopter. So I remember being at the hospital and hearing the noise of the helicopter over at the airport, which is only probably 5 minutes away from the hospital. Quite panicky, obviously.
You must have felt, I'm about to give birth.
Oh, I did. I remember saying, I am about to have this baby. Please don't send me. But of course, you know, they've got to do what they think's right for the baby. So off we went. And we were put on board their helicopter. I think there were a few crew and a paramedic, the midwife from here, and the GP and my husband, all aboard the helicopter. And off we went. What I really remember about it is feeling very anxious about my baby. I think it was about 10 minutes into the flight when I gave birth to Jacob. A great moment. It was quite frightening because the helicopter's quite dark, very noisy. Couldn't hear what any of the staff there were saying to me or the crew, so I really relied heavily on their thumbs up to know that my baby was okay. And it was a healthy 9-pound baby boy.
Yes,
yeah.
But a glorious outcome after...
Yeah, fantastic, yeah.
After a terrible time, oh
yeah,
gosh.
Definitely. Yeah, at the time it was quite traumatic, but now just brilliant story. Honestly, healthy baby boy.
Happy, healthy,
yeah.
Born in a helicopter.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Getting him registered wasn't very straightforward. He had to be registered by the base where the aircraft was registered to, which was in Germany. So it's the Culdrose Naval Helicopter en route from Scilly to Truro. Yeah.
That's amazing, isn't it?
It's pretty cool, yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And actually saying en route.
Yeah.
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
That's useful, isn't it? You know exactly where you were born, don't you? Yeah?
Yeah.
In 2001, the world was shaken by the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers in New York. Once again, the Junglies were sent to Iraq. Inevitably, ZA-298 was amongst the first to arrive. Later, it would operate in Afghanistan. The final years of the Sea Kings would prove to be the busiest of them all. During this time, the Royal Navy helicopters based in Afghanistan were led by the control commander of the Joint Air Group, Jock Gordon.
It's like an old friend that's grown quite fat, quite heavy, quite wheezy. We've had to put armoured floors and armoured seats on it. We've had to put ballistic protection to stop bullets coming through it. But it still does what it says on the tin. You know, it's still flying around in 50 degrees temperature in Afghanistan. You feel safe in it, and you just know that every time you take off, you're going to get the job done, and it's going to bring you back.
With the Sea King, you got the impression that if anything went wrong, it would certainly be my fault and not the aircraft's.
But back home, the old Ace of Tubs was still on top. 771 Squadron was rescuing more and more people. The connection between the British public and the Sea King was about to grow even stronger because of an event which took place right underneath us here in Boscastle. On August the 16th, 2004, This Cornish village was the site of the biggest ever air-sea rescue operation on British soil.
On the ground, local people knew that this was no ordinary event. Auxiliary Coast Guard Graham King was first to raise the alarm.
There was an incident starting at Boscastle. The river had burst its banks, a lot of people around.
Yeah.
I think we should put a group page out, get the vehicle ready, and just try and get people out of the harbour area.
Yes.
One of our friends, Scotty, from the Wellington Hotel, was put his wetsuit on and was pulling people out of cars as they floated by. This was a very serious situation. I felt that helicopters were going to be needed and made a second phone call.
Lieutenant Commander Florrie Ford was in Boscastle that day.
We came round the harbour, and that was really the first time we saw the devastation. It was like walking into a disaster movie. Jesus, these cars aren't flying past, aren't they?
The water's actually rising very quickly as well.
Literally saw this foaming water come round the corner towards us, and in amongst it was all these cars. Dozens of cars, and they're all sat up with their wipers going and their indicators going, and we're thinking, what are we going to do? What we started to do was hover taxi over each of the cars to find out if anyone was in there. We were looking for movement. We didn't see anyone, and then we saw some movement in one of the cars. So we hovered over the top, and we actually noticed it was some dogs. And although we really wanted to go down and try and save them, the next car might have had kids in or something like that, so we had to make the conscious decision to let the car go by.
1 month's rain fell in just 2 hours. 2 billion litres of water burst through the village. In Boscastle's visitors' centre, the water was rising fast. Trapped inside with other tourists, Kim and Andy Evans and their 3 children fled to the attic for safety.
It was a really small space for 12 people.
It was very claustrophobic, very dark, so if we hadn't climbed up into the attic at that point, we would have drowned.
That's right, because the doors very quickly did go.
Oh, the doors, smashed.
There were trees, there were phone boxes, and everything just getting washed down this valley here, in round the harbour and out to sea.
Then, disaster. A tree caught in the raging river smashed through the wall of the visitors' centre.
The noise, it was like a bomb going off.
That was a real turning point, because up until then the building was intact. When the tree hit, the whole front of the building just went out into the harbour, out to sea. There was a quarter of the building left.
I just remember thinking, what if some of us get out and then the others don't?
And I think we all felt at that point that maybe we won't get out of this.
There were so many mini incidents, they just told us to save who you can, and that just sends the shivers up your spine.
You went out to the Velux window first.
I went out first, climbed up a very slippery roof onto the top.
It was.
And you passed the children on to me.
We did, one by one, they all went out. And those tiles were so slippery as we were trying to get out.
Could have just slipped off at one side.
Could easily have slipped, and you would have been straight in that water, and that was so scary. Such an awful feeling, knowing that potentially we could lose any one of you at any moment.
Everything had been taken out of our control. There was nothing we could do to save ourselves, basically.
No.
Andy, Kim and their 3 children had made their final fateful move. They were now trapped on the rooftop. They only had one hope left.
That area was buzzing with helicopters, and every one of them, of course, was plucking people out.
Coming out, 2 on, winching in, they're well clear.
But the question was, would the helicopter come up and rescue us in time before the building collapsed?
If you look at the car park, come down to the right end of the car park, that's where the visitor centre was. It's not there anymore. There were children on the roof.
I can just remember feeling like that I was going to be thrown off the building with the force of the wind.
Force of the wind,
the force of the wind from that helicopter. All I was thinking to myself was, come on, hurry up, hurry up.
Using just hand signals, we have to fight our way through the power cables, because there's power cables running down the side, so we have to manoeuvre the aircraft, and then Bob went down.
You took Carl, and Luke first, and he took them up one by one.
Yes.
He went up with them, and I remember shouting up to you, that's one safe, that's
exactly.
One child safe and out of the danger.
Yeah.
And the winchman came down and he was putting the strop around you. And do you remember what I said to you when you were going?
Give my brothers a big hug and a kiss and tell them I love them.
I just wanted you to do what I couldn't do myself at that point.
And then when I was going up, I can just remember feeling that I was falling out of the strap and I was going to drown then. But then when I got up there, I just had a huge rush of relief go over.
We got the children into the back of the aircraft and they were great. I mean, as they came out, big grins, you know, they loved it. It was like being in the fairground.
And I remember my feet slipping and I thought, this is it, I'm going to go in. But of course then the strop caught me and I went up.
Looking down the length of the Sea King helicopter and seeing all these faces of all these other people who've been rescued. And I remember seeing Carl, Luke and Emery's little face, absolutely petrified, soaked through. But of course realising that at this point, as a family unit, we were all together and we were all completely safe. And we'd been rescued effectively from a building which was about to collapse.
It's changed all of us. I mean, you know, it was a very traumatic thing and it has changed us, there's no question. And it's changed the village physically. The river's wider, got a new bridge, the river's deeper, the car park's changed. Several buildings were washed away and have been rebuilt. Still a beautiful place and we still get lots of visitors. So, yeah, it happened. We're all trying to get over it still, I think. But it's left its mark.
In total, there were 7 Sea Kings in the air over Boscastle that day. The combined skills of the Royal Navy and the RAF ensured that not one single life was lost. In 2010, having racked up more than 40 years of service, the Sea King found itself thrust into the public eye once more. Flight Lieutenant Wales, or Prince William, qualified as a search and rescue pilot based at RAF Valley in Anglesey.
I'm incredibly proud to be amongst the search and rescue guys, and I'm very privileged to be flying with some of the best pilots, I think, in the world.
Much of the time he's able to do his vital work out of the public eye. But in the summer of 2012, the Prince was at the controls during one of the most heartwarming rescues of recent times. 2 sisters, 16-year-old Sharon and 13-year-old Tamara, were playing in the waves when they were swept out to sea off Anglesey in North Wales.
If the helicopter hadn't come when it did, I wouldn't be here.
The West sisters needed their Prince. Thankfully, he was only 38 seconds away. And thankfully, he brought a king with him.
If it hadn't been for the Sea King helicopter and, bizarrely, Prince William actually flying it, I wouldn't be able to sit here today with my arm around my daughter. And I'm sure every parent knows how that feels.
The Sea King is about to end its military career. This great old warhorse is being retired, but its departure heralds an even greater changing of the guard. Both the RAF and the Royal Navy's dedicated air-sea rescue squadrons are being disbanded. From 2016, our airborne search and rescue fleet will be privatised. This really is the end of the Sea King era.
It's no glamour puss, more of a brute than a beauty. A few too many close shaves. But what a character. It just never seems to know when it's beat. And ZA-298 was the king of them all. The Mark IV Jungly, often blooded, never bowed. But while on a mission in Afghanistan, the king of the jungles was shot down again. A Taliban rocket smashed through the aircraft, missing the pilots by inches.
There was nothing really we could do for the Sea King. She was patently damaged beyond our immediate ability to repair. At that point, we had no responsibilities other than to stay alive.
But Royal Navy engineer Neil Copeland was not about to give up on the old aircraft yet. He and his team of 9 engineers spent 4 hours working on the Sea King, just yards from the front line and the Taliban fighters that had shot her down. Finally, they strapped 298 under a Chinook helicopter and flew her home.
We lifted it out and brought it back to Bastion. It was recovered to UK, repaired. It's been back at Yeovilton in December of this year.
It's just a matter of pride, really, to do the best you can and ensure you come home with everything you took out.
3 times that aircraft has been shot down, and 3 times she's got right back up again. One of the most reliable aircraft in the armed forces. The king of the jungles. So when something absolutely must get there on time, there's only one helicopter up to the task. ZA-298.
After more than 2 months in this country, the Olympic flame is getting used to dramatic entrances. Perhaps this was the most spectacular yet. Abseiled into the Tower of London from a Royal Navy helicopter.
I can't say this is a beautiful aircraft, but there's something about it which is just very impressive. You feel it's built to do a job. It's here for a function, and it carries that out superbly. So when you're on this plane, you feel comfortable. You feel it's going to do its work. It's going to get you home. And that's a marvellous feeling. Just makes you feel safe.
I'm not really superstitious, but that aircraft seemed to look after us very well.
I have a place in my heart for them.
You've got me out of some scrapes. You did very well, old friend.
What a bird. It's nearly 50 years since the MOD ordered their first batch of Sea King. Countless conflicts and thousands of rescues later, it can hold its bruised old head up proudly. Job done.
They saved our children and they saved us.
Fantastic. I'll miss them.
I'm the only person ever born on the Sea King, and I'd like to say goodbye.
I know everything comes to its end of its life, but it's just sad to see them go.
Thank you. Thank you for saving my life.
Quite the very best of Britain's flying past. Fit for a prince, queen of the skies, king of the sea. Farewell, old friend.
This is the sea.
Coming up, an African Odyssey, a brand new Top Gear special in search of the source of the Nile in second-hand estate cars. That's in half an hour. And at 9, after recent events in Russia and a near miss, Professor Ian Stewart presents a Horizon special, The Truth About Meteors, and a taster coming up.
Suffering